The backstage area of WWE Raw erupted into chaos the moment Paul Heyman's silhouette appeared in the corridor where GUSO was preparing for his match. The special counsel moved with that calculated precision he's known for, every step deliberate, every movement screaming danger. G was taping up his wrists, headphones in, completely unaware that his past was about to come crashing back into his present with the force of a freight train. The production crew scattered like roaches when the lights come on, knowing that what was about to happen needed no witnesses except the cameras that would capture every brutal second. If you're ready to dive deep into the most explosive backstage confrontation of the year, hit that subscribe button right now because what you're about to witness will change everything you thought you knew about the Bloodline saga. Heyman didn't announce his presence with words at first. He simply stood there in his expensive suit, arms crossed, watching G with those calculating eyes that have orchestrated the downfall of countless WWE superstars over the decades. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting shadows that made the special counsel look even more sinister than usual. G finally sensed someone watching him and yanked out his headphones, spinning around to find Heyman standing just 15 feet away, the trademark smirk already forming on his lips. The air between them crackled with electricity, the kind of tension that makes your skin crawl and your heart race. G's first reaction was defiance. He straightened up to his full height, letting the athletic tape fall from his hands as he squared his shoulders and met Heyman's gaze head-on. For months now, G had been building a life outside the bloodline, proving to himself and everyone watching that he didn't need Roman Reigns to be successful. He had main event shows, won matches on his own merit, and started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had finally escaped the gravitational pull of the tribal chief. But Heyman's presence in that corridor was a harsh reminder that some orbits are impossible to break free from. The special counsel took 3 slow steps forward, his leather shoes clicking against the concrete floor with an almost musical rhythm. He raised one hand in a gesture that was both greeting and warning, his fingers splayed wide before he pointed directly at G's chest. The cameras zoomed in tight on both men, capturing every nuance of their expressions, every micro-movement that told the story of two people connected by history and separated by betrayal. Heyman's mouth opened, and those 4 words came out with the weight of a death sentence: "You're not safe anymore." G actually laughed at first, a nervous sound that echoed off the cinder block walls. He shook his head and took a step toward Heyman, closing the distance between them to maybe 10 feet now. He told Heyman that those kinds of threats didn't work on him anymore, that he had heard them all before when he was still under Roman's thumb. He said he had moved on, grown stronger, become his own man in ways that the special counsel and the tribal chief could never understand. But even as G spoke these words of defiance, there was something in his voice that betrayed the fear lurking underneath, a tremor that Heyman picked up on immediately. Heyman tilted his head to the side like a curious bird examining an interesting specimen. He let G finish his little speech before responding with a slow, deliberate clap that somehow sounded more threatening than encouraging. The special counsel began to pace, moving in a small circle around G, forcing the younger man to pivot and turn to keep him in sight. Heyman started talking about loyalty, about blood, about the unbreakable bonds that tie family together even when family members make terrible decisions. His voice was smooth like honey but laced with poison, each word carefully chosen for maximum psychological impact. The special counsel reminded G about all the times the bloodline had protected him, all the moments when being part of that family had saved his career and possibly his life in the brutal world of WWE competition. He brought up matches where Roman had interfered on G's behalf, times when the group had surrounded him like armor against enemies who would have destroyed him otherwise. Heyman painted a picture of G as someone who had taken all the benefits of being in the bloodline without wanting to pay any of the costs, someone who wanted the rewards without the responsibilities. G interrupted, his voice rising in volume and intensity. He shouted that he had paid his dues 1,000 times over, that he had bled for the bloodline, sacrificed for Roman, and done things he wasn't proud of, all in the name of family loyalty. He reminded Heyman about the matches where he had put his body on the line, the times he had taken beatings meant for the tribal chief, the moments where his own dreams and ambitions had been crushed under the weight of Roman's ego. His hands were shaking now, balled into fists at his sides, and you could see the years of suppressed frustration and anger bubbling to the surface. Heyman stopped pacing and stood completely still, letting G's words hang in the air like smoke after a fire. The special counsel's expression shifted from amused to something colder, harder, more dangerous. He took a step closer, now within arm's reach of G, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout could have. He told G that everything he just said proved exactly why he wasn't safe anymore, that his bitterness and resentment had blinded him to the reality of his situation. Heyman explained that leaving the bloodline didn't make G free, it made him a target. The special counsel began listing names, former allies and enemies of Roman Reigns who had thought they could stand against the tribal chief and survive to regret it. He talked about careers that had been ended, bodies that had been broken, and spirits that had been crushed under the heel of Roman's dominance. Each name was like a hammer blow, a reminder of the consequences of defiance. Heyman made it clear that these weren't threats or predictions, they were patterns, historical data that showed what happened to people who crossed the bloodline. G was just the latest entry in a very long and very tragic list. G tried to interrupt again, but Heyman raised his hand sharply, cutting him off mid-sentence. The special counsel's eyes flashed with something dangerous, and for a moment you could see the ruthless strategist who had orchestrated some of the most brutal campaigns in WWE history. He told G that the time for talking back, for defending himself, for pretending he had any control over this situation was over. The wheels had already been set in motion, plans had been made, and forces were converging that G couldn't possibly understand or defend against. The only question was when and where the hammer would fall. The special counsel pulled out his phone, a sleek device that seemed almost out of place in the gritty backstage environment. He scrolled through something, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen, before turning it around to show G. The cameras couldn't quite capture what was on the display, but whatever G saw made his face go pale, all the color draining from his cheeks in an instant. His eyes widened and his mouth opened slightly, a silent gasp of recognition or horror. Heyman smiled wider, clearly satisfied with the reaction, and put the phone back in his pocket with exaggerated slowness. She demanded to know what was on that phone, his voice cracking slightly with desperation. He reached out toward Heyman, not quite grabbing him but close enough that security personnel in the background tensed up, ready to intervene if things turned physical. But Heyman didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't show even a hint of fear or concern. He simply stared at G with those cold, calculating eyes and told him that some knowledge comes with a price, and right now G couldn't afford to pay it. The special counsel suggested that instead of worrying about what was on the phone, G should be worrying about his match tonight, about walking to that ring, about every corner and shadow between here and there. The psychology of the moment was crushing. Heyman wasn't just threatening G with physical violence, he was planting seeds of paranoia that would grow and fester in his mind long after this confrontation ended. Every referee could be compromised, every opponent could be working with the bloodline, every person G passed in the hallway could be part of some elaborate trap. The special counsel was weaponizing uncertainty, turning the entire WWE arena into a hostile environment where G couldn't trust anyone or anything. This was psychological warfare at its finest, and Heyman was a master craftsman. Other wrestlers had started gathering at various points along the corridor, drawn by the raised voices and the palpable sense of confrontation. Nobody got too close though, everyone maintaining a respectful and somewhat fearful distance from Paul Heyman when he was in this mode. A few younger talents whispered to each other, pointing and recording on their phones for social media clout, but the veterans knew better. They watched silently, faces grim, understanding that they were witnessing something significant, a turning point in a story that had been building for years. G took a deep breath, visibly trying to compose himself and regain some measure of control over the situation. He told Heyman that whatever Roman had planned, whatever the bloodline thought they were going to do to him, he would be ready. He said he had allies now, friends who had his back, people who understood what it was like to stand up against tyranny and oppression. His voice gained strength as he spoke, feeding off his own words, building momentum like a wrestler feeding off crowd energy. He declared that he wasn't the same scared kid who used to jump when Roman snapped his fingers, that he had evolved and grown into someone who could stand on his own 2 feet. Heyman listened to this entire speech with an expression of amused tolerance, like a parent watching a toddler throw a tantrum. When G finally finished, breathing heavily from the emotional exertion, the special counsel began to clap again, slow and methodical. He congratulated G on his inspiring words, on his touching belief in friendship and loyalty and all those other fairy tale concepts that apparently still meant something to him. Then Heyman's expression hardened again, and he asked G a simple question that cut through all the bravado like a knife through butter: where were these allies right now? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. G looked around, suddenly aware of how alone he actually was in that corridor despite the gathering crowd of onlookers. His supposed friends and allies were nowhere to be seen, busy with their own matches and storylines and careers. The people watching from a distance were just that, distant observers rather than participants, content to watch the drama unfold but unwilling to step in and risk the wrath of the bloodline themselves. Heyman let the silence stretch out, let G feel the isolation, let the reality of his situation sink in like water into a sponge. The special counsel moved even closer now, invading G's personal space in a way that was deliberately uncomfortable. He spoke in a low voice, barely above a whisper, but the cameras with their sensitive microphones picked up every word. Heyman told G that Roman Reigns didn't forget betrayals, didn't forgive traitors, and most importantly, didn't fail when he set his mind to destroying someone. The tribal chief had been patient, allowing G his moment of rebellion, his brief taste of independence, but patience had limits and those limits had been reached. The time for mercy, if there had ever been such a time, was over. G shoved Heyman slightly, not hard enough to knock him down but enough to create some space between them. The security personnel took a step forward, hands on their radios, ready to call for backup if this escalated into a full physical altercation. But Heyman simply adjusted his tie, smoothed down his suit jacket, and smiled that infuriating smile that made you want to punch him just on principle. He told G that putting hands on him was the second biggest mistake of his life, right after leaving the bloodline in the first place. The special counsel promised that Roman would hear about this physical contact, and it would be added to the already substantial list of grievances that needed to be addressed. The conversation shifted when Heyman brought up G's family, not the bloodline but his actual blood relatives, the people he was trying to protect by distancing himself from Roman's influence. The special counsel suggested, in that subtle way of his, that maybe G's rebellion wasn't just putting himself in danger but everyone he cared about. He mentioned names, locations, schedules, little details that proved the bloodline had been keeping tabs on G's personal life in ways that were deeply unsettling. This wasn't just about revenge or punishment, this was about sending a message to anyone else who might think about defying the tribal chief. G's anger exploded at this point. He lunged toward Heyman, fully intending to grab the special counsel by his expensive collar and probably do some serious damage, but security finally intervened. 3 large men in black shirts with WWE security printed on the back step between them, physically restraining G while carefully positioning themselves to protect Heyman without actually touching him. The special counsel didn't retreat or show any concern, he simply stood there watching G struggle against the security guards, his smile never wavering, his confidence absolute. As security pulled G back, Heyman straightened his cuffs and delivered his final message. He told G that tonight's match was just the beginning, that every match from here on out would be a test of survival rather than skill. The special counsel promised that G would spend the rest of his career looking over his shoulder, jumping at shadows, wondering when the other shoe would drop. He said that this state of constant fear and anxiety would be G's new normal, his punishment for thinking he could walk away from the bloodline without consequences. The psychological torture would be just as effective as any physical beatdown, maybe more so. Heyman turned to leave, his business apparently concluded, but he paused after taking just a few steps. He looked back over his shoulder at G, who was still being held by security personnel, and delivered one last parting shot. The special counsel said that Roman wanted G to know that this wasn't personal, it was just business, family business that needed to be handled appropriately. The tribal chief didn't hate G, he was simply disappointed, and disappointment from Roman Reigns carried consequences that would echo throughout G's entire career and possibly beyond. The special counsel walked away then, disappearing around a corner and leaving behind a scene of barely controlled chaos. G was finally released by security, and he stood there breathing heavily, hands still clenched into fists, his entire body vibrating with a mixture of rage and fear and frustration. The other wrestlers who had been watching began to disperse, not wanting to be associated with someone who had apparently earned the full attention and displeasure of Paul Heyman and by extension Roman Reigns. G was left alone again, this time truly alone, the isolation Heyman had talked about becoming stark reality. The cameras captured G sliding down the wall to sit on the cold concrete floor, head in his hands, the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on him like a physical force. His shoulders shook slightly, whether from anger or something else was hard to tell. A production assistant approached cautiously, asking if he was okay, if he needed anything, but G just waved them away without looking up. He sat there for a long moment, clearly trying to process the confrontation, trying to figure out his next move in a game where all the pieces seemed to be working against him. The implications of this backstage confrontation spread through the WWE locker room like wildfire. People who had been friendly with G suddenly became distant, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire when the bloodline made their move. Potential allies reconsidered their positions, weighing the benefits of helping G against the very real danger of becoming targets themselves. The entire atmosphere backstage shifted, becoming more tense and uncertain, as everyone wondered what form Roman's revenge would take and who might get caught in the blast radius. G eventually pulled himself together enough to continue preparing for his match, but the encounter with Heyman had clearly shaken him to his core. His usual confidence and swagger were missing, replaced by a hunted look that never quite left his eyes. Every person who walked past him got a suspicious glance, every unexpected noise made him flinch slightly, every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. Heyman's psychological warfare had achieved its goal, turning G into a paranoid shell of the confident performer who had been taping his wrists just 20 minutes earlier. The special counsel had proven once again why he was considered one of the most dangerous men in WWE, not because of his physical prowess but because of his ability to destroy people from the inside out using nothing but words and implications and carefully cultivated fear. If you want to stay updated on every twist and turn in this explosive storyline, if you want to see what happens when the bloodline finally makes their move against GUSO, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now because what we witnessed backstage at Raw was just the opening salvo in what promises to be an all-out war.